about the greatness of the world which awaits us, the spiritual worlds of God. And in fact, Baha'u'llah mentions that if ever the glory of the next life was revealed to the extent of a needle's eye, then man would commit suicide. In the same way that if a child knew what a small place is living in and what a vast place is awaiting him, that child, you couldn't live there, you would have a revolution there. Really. Wouldn't want to live there. But God, the same God which has not given the child a capacity to appreciate that period, is completely ignorant about it. We are the same in that sense, because we will never be able to know our soul. In fact, there is a passage in Islam which says, if you want to know God, you should know yourself. They have asked Baha'u'llah, what does this mean? He says it means that when you look at yourself, you will find everything you have in your body is a manifestation of the soul. For instance, your eyesight is a manifestation of the soul in the body. Your hearing is a manifestation of the soul. All your senses are the manifestations of the soul in the body. Your brain is a manifestation of the soul in the body. But he says, your heart, which loves, is a manifestation of the soul in your body. But he says, if you add all these manifestations together, the sum total does not become the soul. And then he says, what is the soul? And then he says, if you live as long as thousands of years, and if all the peoples of the world put their thoughts together, they shall never know what that soul is. And he says, when you reach to that conclusion that you will never understand your soul, the reality of the soul, the essence of your soul, then you will say to yourself, how can I ever know the essence of my God who has created that soul? And you realize your impotence to recognize the essence of God. And he says, when you reach to that stage, the knowledge of God has dawned on you. This is when you begin to know God, when you realize that you will never know him. Impossible to know the essence of God. The essence of God is hidden from the eyes of men. We can never reach it. In fact, Baha'u'llah mentions that manifestations of God have no understanding of the essence of God. Because if they did, they would be partners with him. The manifestations of God have no access to the essence of God. You know, you read some of the passages that Shoghi Effendi has translated in English. He says 10,000 Moses is thunderstruck, I'm paraphrasing his words, at the Sinai of God's revelation, not knowing his essence. And 10,000 prophets as great as Jesus are dismayed at this thought of not thou, mine essence thou shalt never know. This is the call they get from God. My essence thou shalt not know. Baha'u'llah mentions, says 10,000 prophets as great as Jesus stand dismayed at the threshold of God, hearing this voice, thou shalt never know my essence. Now this indicates that the essence of God is beyond the comprehension of anything. Can never rise to that. He is the creator, and the creator must always stand above his creation. If it was, then we would be equal with him. If the mind could ever grasp anything, it means you are equal with that thing. You can only understand something which is either below you or on the same level as you. You can never understand something above you. It's impossible. So now, Baha'u'llah says this is the meaning. When you realize that you cannot know your own soul, the essence of your soul, then you can say, well, how can I know the essence of my God who has created my soul? Impossible. Now we go a little bit further. Let me take you a little further. Now, what time do we close this session, Mr. Chairman? 12. What time is it now? Oh, yes. 12. But you can't carry on. You mean the first session is going till 12 o'clock? You are very great people. You mean you can listen to all this? Well, anytime you get, there's no break between it, no. Yeah, all right. Well, we'll see. If I see you yawning, and then I'll say, all right, we'll have a break. Actually, if anybody wants to have a little doze off or something, or go to a little bit of sleep, go and sit in the back rows, because you can never see them. That's what they are doing there probably now, in the back rows. Now, I will come back to your questions, if I may. If you just wait till I finish this subject, you might find your questions are answered, probably, because we haven't even touched upon the subject.
Excuse me, this is not a question about the subject. Why you were digressing a little bit, I wanted to say that when I drove up, someone's ego in the parking lot had this emergency light.
Well, now, friends, we come to another similarity here between the embryo and the soul. And that is that when a child is born, it can bring with him whatever it has. It cannot bring anything that it hasn't. It just brings with him whatever it has. And in fact, in one of his tablets, Baha'u'llah says, if you needed anything else in this world, I would have given it to you there, the womb of the mother. Now, it's the same thing with the soul. The soul can take with him whatever it has. But you can't take with you anything which is bad. Because bad does not exist in itself. It has no existence. Now, don't take me wrong and say that I said... You have 1 cent or you have $1. That's a very small amount of money. This is the meaning of poverty. But whatever you have is positive. And that's what you can take with you. A murderer, for instance, is a person who has impoverished his soul. Well, he can take with him a little bit of good. A saint is a person who has got a lot of good qualities and perfections, and he carries with it to the next life. And therefore, each one of them is like having a capital. You begin your life with a capital. One is a very small capital, one is a large capital. And everyone grows in the spiritual worlds of God. There is no such thing as eternal damnation. Well, there are some souls which we know are diseased in this life, and this is the only one which God has indicated will not be forgiven. And that is the souls of the covenant breakers. In the Christian theology, it is those who sin against the Holy Ghost. And I may, if there is chance, I will explain to you really what is a covenant breaker, as we Baha'is talk about it in nature, looking at nature, not to look at the philosophy of covenant breaking, because we have no time for it in the faith, but nature. Again, as I said, everything in the faith, you can look at nature and find out these things. You can find out what covenant breaking is in nature. Now, we don't go into that subject now, but maybe I'll make a note of it here and sometime we can bring it up. So you see, every soul begins its spiritual life depending on its own qualities and perfections that it has acquired in this life. And this is why Baha'u'llah says that in the next life, the souls will be graded. We will be separated. Each one of us, in accordance with his own accomplishments in this life, will attain a certain position, a certain grade, a certain level. And he says those who are on a high level will encompass those who are on a lower level, and will completely understand them and will encompass them. And those who are on a lower level will not understand anything about those who are on a higher level. And their life in relation to them, to those who are on a higher level, is like non-existence. Now this exactly applies in nature. Exactly. You look at nature, you will find God has created in this nature great many levels of creation. First of all, there are several kingdoms. There is the mineral kingdom, there is the vegetable kingdom, there is the animal kingdom, there is the kingdom of man. And yet within each one of these kingdoms there are grades. Look at the animal kingdom. There are so many grades. On one end of the scale you come across a creature like a worm, for instance. A worm is an animal. And on the other end of the scale, you come across the intelligent animals. And in between, there are enormous number of animals of different degrees, you see. And God seems to love this different levels. He loves to have this difference in His creation. We may not love it. I often say to myself, really, if we were God, we would have... it's a pity to, for instance, look at creatures like a mouse, for instance. What a terrible thing to be a mouse instead of being a man. Can you imagine he could have been a man? But it's a mouse. Now, God still likes this. He likes the mouse. He likes to have a mouse and He likes to have a man. He likes to have different grades. And it's the same thing in the spiritual worlds of God. We are going to be graded. And the life of a worm in relation to the life of another high intelligent animal is like death in relation to life. Really. But it has its life. It's not dead. The worm is not dead. It has life. But its life in relation to the life of a dog, for instance, is like death in relation to life. And so it is the same thing we understand in the spiritual realms. That the souls will be graded in accordance with what qualities we have acquired. As I told you, we cannot take bad things with us to the next life. But whatever good things we can take, those good things will determine the level in which we are going to be. Now, another important question, which again we can find it from nature and looking at the writings, of course. As I mentioned before, we must look at these two things always. And from that we learn a lot of things. Is that when you look at where is the next life? Where is the next world? Now, if you want to know that, look at nature. Nature will answer you. When you look at the child in the womb of the mother, we said that the embryo, remember, growing in the womb of the mother and the soul are counterparts of each other. When you look at the child in the womb of the mother, where is he when he's growing in the womb world? Where is he? He's here. Isn't he? He's in this world, really. The distance is very little. There is only a barrier which prevents him from being in this world. But he's here. He's carried with his mother around. Have you ever seen in a farm an egg breaking and a chicken comes out? Where was the chicken before the egg breaks? It was there. But it couldn't realize it itself until the shell breaks. So Baha'u'llah tells us that the next world is here. It's closer to us than we can ever imagine. But it is closed before our eyes. And as I mentioned before, Baha'u'llah says if we could only perceive to the extent of a needle's eye the greatness and the glory of the next life, then we would want to commit suicide to get there. So you can see here how the next life, the next world is just beside us. And then there is another thing we learn from the child in the womb of the mother, and that is this, that once the child is growing in the womb of the mother, there are many people who are involved in caring for that child. The mother is the first person who really is enabling the child to grow. The father, the mother, the relatives, the doctors, the nurses, the community, all of them are paying attention and working hard for enabling that child to grow once it is in the womb of the mother. And we are told it's the same thing in this life in relation to the holy souls which have passed away. They are the cause of all the growth and development which takes place in this life. But you remember I was saying to you, it's a one-way communication. They encompass us, they help us, they inspire us in ways that we have no way of understanding it. Baha'u'llah mentions that martyrs of the faith will produce such an effect upon the growth and development of this world, that although that he says that even though that it takes place rarely, it will produce tremendous results in this life. It's just like the care, the attention, the love which the parents, the community has for the child growing in the womb of the mother. But as I mentioned to you, we cannot take with us into the next life anything which is bad, because bad does not exist in its own outward sense. So the souls which are gone on in the next life, everything they can do to us is for our good. They have no bad things. They cannot influence us in a bad way. They can only influence us in a good way. And if it is anything which we want, which is bad for us, they can't give it to you. They can only give you what is good for you. And what is good for you sometimes may be sufferings. Maybe it is sufferings. The more our souls suffer, the more it becomes ready to absorb spiritual powers to itself. Suffering in the path of God. Bearing those sacrifices we do, whatever realm it may be, in whatever field, you sacrifice something. You give up your time. You're tired, but you give up your time. You go and teach the people. You go and promote the faith, but you go through a great deal of hardship. That is good for the soul. That enables the soul to grow. And the concourse on high, those holy souls which are passed away from this life, they will assist us if we walk in the right way. But as soon as you want to go in the wrong way, they cannot assist you, because they cannot influence us in a bad way. Now I am going to now go into another aspect of the soul. And maybe before I do that, so far we can go on and talk about this quite a lot. But I think we have got an idea here. Maybe it's not a bad thing at this point that if you had any questions about what I have said which you have not understood it, maybe we can talk about it now. And then we will go to another aspect of the soul which is very important, because all these things that we have said so far about the soul coming to us from the worlds of God, we said from the spiritual realms, we said that the soul has to acquire qualities and perfections here. We said how everything in this life has a counterpart. In the spiritual worlds, anything physical is a counterpart of something spiritual. We discussed all these things, and there we were able to get some idea, only an idea, an impression of what the soul is and its qualities and powers are. But now, and we said that the purpose of life so far is to acquire qualities and perfections. But there is a greater purpose in our creation, far, far greater from acquiring qualities and perfections. Far greater. And again, in order to understand that, I'll take you to nature again. But before we enter into this subject, let us see if there is anything so far which you want to comment about or question. Now, I'm not referring to those people who are sitting in the back row who probably are asleep. But that's a place if you want to rest, that's a good place. We have this game in Europe. When we have classes, we often say, now look here, go into the back row. It's a good place to be. Right. Well, it seems to me there is no... Yes?
On the grades or levels of the soul after...
Pardon?
When one person dies and then their soul goes on and then it's graded level...
Yes?
Put on a different level, is the...
You know, is that The question is this, that if you are in a higher grade, will you be able to influence? Is that what you're saying? This world more? Yes. Well, this is what Baha'u'llah says to us. He's not talking of the influence of those. He says the holy souls. In his writings, he talks about the influence of the holy souls in this life is so great that it can produce all the arts and sciences in this life and become the cause of growth. It is obviously from the holy souls that will be that this will happen. But again, you see, these are only, as I said, our own limited, very, very limited understanding of the realities and the truths. We shall know it in the next life fully what's happening. Yes? Sorry? Like the seed is planted, then it grows and acquires qualities and perfections. But at some point in his life, that soul must produce a child, must give birth to a child. The soul, I'm talking of the soul, which is a spiritual thing, must give birth to a fruit, a child. But as I said, it cannot produce it immediately. And in fact, there is a certain age for it, that it can begin to think in terms of producing a child. And I'll mention the age later on. Now go back to nature again. You will find anything which produces a child is a female. A female species is what produces a child. And I hope that men would not mind me saying this. I think that the female is a much better, more complete form of creation than a male. You know that? Oh, you agree? Oh, there we are. Now men will be angry when I go out of this room. You must be protecting me, you know. I'll be attacked. I'll be attacked. You see, because a female can reproduce, can produce a fruit. But again, the tree cannot produce a fruit by itself. And we are just talking of nature. It has to be pollinated. A female cannot produce a child on her own. There must be a relationship with a male factor so that the female can conceive a child and then give birth to it. This is nature. This is the same thing with the soul. Our soul, which is a spiritual entity, if it has to produce a child, it cannot produce a child on her own. The soul here must act as a female and enter into partnership with another agency, with another force. But the choice here is given to us. A tree has no choice. It's pollinated by nature. See? The animal has this mating with its own type. But the soul here has got a choice. You can choose whatever agency, whatever force you want to give your soul to it and establish this marriage. It's like a marriage, really, our soul, which is a spiritual thing. Now, I'll tell you what most people of the world do. Of course, most people even don't know they have a soul. They won't even think about it. But most people, without knowing it, they give their soul to this world. They're born here. They live so many years. They think of nothing but material things. Isn't that right? So what happens? They have given their soul to this world. And so the child of that soul, which is a spiritual entity, the child that it produces is not worthy of itself. It is materialism. Imagine our soul give birth to materialism. It's become darkened. There is a little bit of spiritual entity there, but that spiritual entity has given birth, has given itself to this world, established a relationship with this world. And the child of that product is very unworthy. See? Its father is very low. The mother is the soul. But the father is very unworthy. It's in material things. And so the child is materialism. Now Baha'u'llah tells us, I'm just giving you in this form of example, to whom we should give our soul in marriage, in relationship, with whom we should establish a relationship. We should establish a relationship between our souls and the forces of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. In other words, we give ourselves to the influences of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. We open our heart and our soul to the influences of his revelation. Can you imagine? A very much more exalted station than ourselves. The forces of the revelation, which he has released in the world. We allow our souls to become fertilized by these forces, which he has released. If you let it, because it's up to us. And when you open your heart to the influences of his revelation, and let the forces of his revelation fertilize our souls, then our souls will conceive a child which is worthy. And that child, once it is born, it is known, you can call it the spirit of faith. Our soul has produced the spirit of faith, which is the purpose of life, the purpose of creation, the purpose that God has created us for. And Baha'u'llah says, if the station of that soul is revealed to the eyes of men, I'm paraphrasing his word, who has given birth to the spirit of faith, the whole of creation will be found dumbfounded. Someone who has given birth to the spirit of faith, someone who has said, I believe. When you say, I believe, what really has happened is that your soul and the revelation of Baha'u'llah, as a result of this mystical intercourse, has now produced a child. And you say, I believe. And that child is born. The spirit of faith is born. Now this is the station which God has destined for man, which can overlook all the other qualities and perfections, which can not overlook, it can really dominate over all the other things that we have acquired when you have the spirit of faith. You know, this lamp in here is lighted. Before it was lighted, it was nothing. But when it is lighted, when you look at it, you can't see anything else but the light. It will dominate over all the things. In fact, if you closely look at it, you will see it's full of dust, probably. But you can't see the dust. It has completely overshadowed all the imperfections, because it has become lighted. Of course, you come across beautiful chandeliers somewhere hanging in someone's house. You come across beautiful people in this world with great qualities and perfections, really, who are not Baha'is. You come across great many people who live a marvelous life, much better than me, I'm sure. They are like as chandeliers, you know, like this beautiful crystal lamp, which is exquisite, but it's not lighted. This is an old little bulb or an old little lamp, full of dust and full of all kinds of imperfections. But it is connected. That's lighted. And that is the difference. But the real thing to be is to be a chandelier which is lighted. That is the real purpose of life. To have the qualities and perfections, and being exquisite qualities and perfections, and also lighted. That is the story of the early, or the believers, both early and the present time. To acquire qualities and perfections, and to have faith, to have the spirit of faith. Now, this faith, when it is born, when this child is born, we said the spirit of faith is the child which really our soul has given birth to. It has conceived it because, it doesn't happen suddenly also. When you give yourself to the influences of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, it doesn't immediately appear as a spirit of faith. Just like a woman who becomes pregnant doesn't immediately give birth to a child. There must be a period of conception, of growth, of that embryonic growth until it can be born. It takes time. But there comes a time that then you have so much sure of it that you have faith. And you say, I really believe. And you really believe in your heart. I also mentioned, you remember, that when the tree comes into being, you remember we talked about a tree. It's first you plant the seed and then it grows. It doesn't immediately produce a fruit either. You have to wait until it becomes mature. It's the same thing with the soul. A soul cannot immediately recognize and give itself to Baha'u'llah. There is an age for it. There is at least a limit for it, that you have to produce that. And that is, you might say, the age of 15, that you will become spiritually obliged to carry out some of the teachings. Although before that, you are a Baha'i, naturally. A child is a Baha'i. But the obligations is not binding on you until you reach that particular age. Now, having said this, that our soul must give birth to a child. Now let us look at nature again. In nature, when a mother gives birth to a child, that action of giving birth to, it may be relatively an easy action. Or maybe I shouldn't say that. To give birth to a child is easy. I shouldn't say that. But really, parents know that to give birth to a child is nothing comparing with the afterwards. After the child is born is the beginning of all the cares and the attention and the labors and the work that you have to do for that child, to protect it constantly, all the time to protect it and help it to grow and mature. It's much more difficult. It's easy to become Baha'i, but it is difficult to grow, to protect the faith, to enable it to grow day by day, and to look after it, and to watch over it. Much more difficult. It needs a vigilance, which is constant vigilance. Has to be constant. So that there we come across again a very new challenge which has come to us. Once you have faith, a new challenge comes to us. And I have said, I am a Baha'i. What is the next step? So that my faith may grow. And remember, our faith is precious to us. Just as much a child is precious to a mother. And it's also precious to its father. And here is the process of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah is attached very deeply to our faith. He loves a believer. He loves the faithful believer, a person who has faith. And his love for him is so great that we cannot ever measure it. The love that Baha'u'llah has for the believers and the outpouring of his love is so great that we cannot visualize in this life. And the sorrow which floods the heart when one person, is his heart, when one person loses his faith or becomes weak in his faith, it brings great sorrows to the heart of the manifestation of God. Such sorrows that are not comparable ever with all the sufferings which were heaped upon him by the enemies. That is nothing. The sufferings of the enemies is nothing. It means nothing to Baha'u'llah, really, the physical sufferings. And he himself mentions the suffering which comes to the manifestation of God is when one soul who has recognized him does one little thing which is an indication that he is not growing. Just like a father who sees his son is becoming ill, and he will see it, he notices, he becomes ill, and as soon as he becomes ill, he becomes worried, he becomes unhappy. One believer doing one thing against the faith brought so much sorrow to the heart of Baha'u'llah, to the heart of Abdul Baha, to the heart of Shoghi Effendi, that is beyond our estimation. And if ever one lost his faith, that would be just like a father who laments the passing of his child. His child is dead. Brings great sorrows to the person also, and to Baha'u'llah. I will give you an example of this, at least not about Baha'u'llah, but I talk about Shoghi Effendi. You know, Shoghi Effendi was very sensitive, a very sensitive soul, very sensitive heart. He was the guardian of the cause. And you know, of course, must have heard the name of Dorothy Baker, who was one of the hands of the cause, an American lady. And she, of course, was involved in a fatal accident where she was traveling in this Comet, which was the first jet airliner which the British made, and the Comet exploded in the air. It wasn't really fully tested, and she was killed. Well, one of the pilgrims was telling us a story. She was present at the time that the news of the passing on this tragic form of Dorothy Baker was brought to Shoghi Effendi. And Shoghi Effendi was sad, and he began to talk about her services, and spoke about her for some time that evening, and then changed the subject and carried on. And after all, this person has passed away. Then, a few days later, the news reached Shoghi Effendi that one young girl who was a believer has been, with some tricks and some plottings, has been taken into the company of the covenant breakers and has joined in marriage with one of them. Now that person is gone, is like a child, like a soul which is dead now. You know, the faith is what I was talking to you about. The faith is gone, is lost. The sorrows which flooded the heart of Shoghi Effendi as a result of this 15-year-old girl was so great that for some days he could not come out of his bed. And he was so crippled really with this blow. But look, the death of a hand of the cause was only 15 minutes. It passed by, nothing. After all, she had ascended to the realms beyond. But the defection of this girl losing her faith dealt such a deadly blow upon him that he could not come and meet with the friends for 1 or 2 days. Now this shows how much our faith is really precious to God, to the manifestation of God, and to his disciple, and to Abdul Baha, and to Shoghi Effendi. Well, now, we wanted to find out what should we do now. We have just given birth to the spirit of faith, just like a mother who has given birth to a child. What are we going to do with it now to enable it to grow? This again we can learn from nature. You want to say something?
Can I get perspective for you on when we're talking about giving birth? Are we talking very black and white about when a person becomes a Baha'i?
Yes, 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 yes. The soul has just given birth to faith.